And I said, "Sir, you did violate hospital policy." A pause. "That is true. But sometimes," I let the words settle, "sometimes the law must recognize the difference between disruption and devotion." I saw his shoulders drop slightly, not in relief, but in recognition. "I am dismissing this case." Gasps, soft, controlled, but there. "Not because the rules do not matter," I continued, "but because in this instance, they were not the most important thing in the room." I leaned forward, and I said something I had never said before in that courtroom. "You were not trespassing. You were saying goodbye. And that is not a crime." Now, I would like to tell you that the story ends there, with a ruling, with closure, with something clean and complete. But life is not like that. After the courtroom cleared, I sat there for a long time, longer than usual, because something about that case stayed with me, still does. You see, we build systems, rules, procedures, all necessary, all important, but sometimes we forget why they exist. They are not there to replace humanity. They are there to protect it. And when they fail to do that, it is not the people who are wrong. It is the system that needs to remember. I still think about that note. Folded, worn, carried in a father's pocket. "Please hold my hand so I'm not scared." And I ask myself, in how many ways, in how many places, are people still waiting for someone to choose compassion over convenience? Because justice, real justice, is not just about what is written. It is about what is felt. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a judge can do is simply recognize that love is not something the law should ever stand in the way of. I have heard thousands of cases, most of them blur together, but this one, I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And on that day, understanding mattered more than punishment. I have sat on that bench for over 23 years, long enough to watch young attorneys grow gray at the temples, long enough to see the same kinds of mistakes dressed in different circumstances, long enough to know that most cases are not really about what they seem. But there are moments, rare, unsettling moments, when a courtroom stops being a place of law and becomes a place where something deeper is exposed. This was one of those moments, and I remember it with a clarity that refuses to fade. It began like any other morning. Dockets stacked high, names I had never heard, charges that blended into one another, minor violations, procedural hearings, the quiet machinery of justice doing what it does every day. Then they called his name. Daniel Reyes. I looked up, and I saw him. He wasn't what you might expect. No anger, no defiance, no desperation in the theatrical sense, just stillness. He stood there in a worn gray jacket, sleeves slightly too long as if it had once belonged to someone else. His hands were rough, the kind that told stories of labor more than words ever could. And his eyes were not afraid, they were tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, the kind that settles into your bones. I've learned to pay attention to eyes. They tell you what paperwork never can. The charge was simple: unauthorized entry into a restricted hospital ward, a violation of protocol, a breach of security. On paper it was straightforward. Hospitals have rules for a reason: safety, order, liability. And according to the report, Mr. Reyes had ignored all of them. He had forced his way past a nurse's station, bypassed security, and entered a room he was explicitly told he could not access. That is not a small thing. Rules exist because when they are broken, consequences follow. That is what I have always believed. But I have also learned that rules do not always tell the whole story. I looked at him. "Mr. Reyes," I said, "do you understand the charge against you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was quiet, not weak, just controlled. "I was told you refused to comply with hospital staff and entered a restricted room." Another nod. "Yes, sir." There was no denial, no attempt to shift blame. That, too, told me something. Now here is something I want you to think about. When a person stands in court and does not defend themselves, it is rarely because they have nothing to say. it is usually because what they have to say feels too heavy to carry into words. And I could feel it, even then. There was something beneath the surface, something waiting. I leaned forward slightly. "Why?" I asked. Not aggressively, not rhetorically, just, "Why?" And that's when everything began to change. He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, then into his pocket, and then he pulled something out. A small folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, creased from being opened and closed too many times. He held it carefully, like it mattered, like it was the most important thing in the room. "My son was in that room," he said, and just like that, the air shifted. Now, I have heard countless stories in that courtroom, excuses dressed as explanations, tragedies shaped to soften consequences. You develop a kind of internal filter. But something about the way he said it, it wasn't crafted, it wasn't defensive, it was final. I asked, "Why were you denied access?" He swallowed, and for the first time his voice cracked. "They said visiting hours were over." A pause. "They said procedures." Another pause. "They said I could come back in the morning." And here is the part that stayed with me. He looked up, straight at me, and said, "There wasn't going to be a morning." Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit in a room, it presses against it. You must understand, this was no longer about unauthorized entry. This was no longer about a hospital policy. This was about something far older than law, something far more human. I asked him gently, "What do you mean?" He unfolded the paper, hands trembling now. "My son, Matteo, he was 12. He paused, and I could see it, the weight, the memory, the moment replaying itself behind his eyes. He had been fighting for a long time. Cancer. He didn't say the word at first, but it was there, in the way he spoke, in the way he breathed between sentences. The doctors told me. That night, it was time. And I have heard that phrase before. It was time. It is a sentence that carries more meaning than any legal code ever could. They told me to go home," he continued. "To rest." He let out a small hollow laugh. "Rest." Then he looked at the paper again. "And then the nurse gave me this." He handed it to the bailiff, who handed it to me, and I unfolded it. It was written in a child's handwriting, uneven, careful, innocent, and it said, "Dad, if I fall asleep, please hold my hand so I'm not scared. I want you to stop for a moment and really think about that, not as a line in a story, but as a real request from a child at the edge of his life." I looked back at Mr. Reyes, and for the first time in years, I felt something inside me shift. "I wasn't there," he said. "They told me to leave. They said I'd be in the way." His voice was breaking now. "They said it was procedure." Then he took a breath, a long one, the kind you take when you're about to say something that has been living inside you. So I waited. In the parking lot, I sat there with this note. And I kept thinking. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. What if he wakes up, and I'm not there? I have presided over cases involving theft, violence, betrayal, loss, but nothing prepares you for the simplicity of that question. What if he wakes up, and I'm not there? "I went back in," he said. "They tried to stop me. I told them I needed to see my son. They said no, and then I went anyway." Now, this is where the law speaks clearly. He broke the rules. He violated protocol. There were consequences for that. There always are. But this was not just about a violation. This was about a father, standing at the edge of losing his child and being told to wait. I asked, "Did you reach him?" He nodded, tears now freely. "Yes." "And?" He closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't be able to continue. but he did. He was awake. Barely. But he saw me. A pause, a breath, a memory too heavy for words. And I held his hand. The courtroom was completely still. No shifting, no whispering, just listening. He squeezed it. Just once. And then... He couldn't finish. He didn't need to, because everyone in that room already knew. Now here is where something remarkable happened, something that changed the weight of the entire case. The prosecutor stood up and said quietly, "Your Honor, we have a statement from the attending nurse." And I read it. It confirmed everything, not just the facts, but the truth. It said, he was calm. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He only repeated one thing. "I just need to hold his hand." And then the final line. I believe he was exactly where he was supposed to be. I put the paper down, and I realized this case was never about what he did wrong, it was about what he did right. Now, as a judge, you are trained to separate emotion from decision, to apply the law without bias, to remain steady. But there are moments when the law is not diminished by compassion, it is fulfilled by it. I looked at Mr. Reyes.